I understand that the Bachelor Nation is large and it has quite a cult following. So whomever sees this, like, please don't drag me that I'm gonna have a very unpopular opinion about this franchise. um, and I also am like not a Bachelor stan. I've watched seasons to season. If there are people that watch this that are like Bachelor Nation stans and like can give you like everyone in order, like maybe this conversation isn't for you, but just know that it's gonna be some hot takes.
Yeah, and I guess we should also give a disclaimer that I am not a Bachelor person either. I do still follow the gossip on it for some
Yeah.
reason, and I care what's happening on The Bachelor. I just don't watch it. So
This season of The Bachelor is the first Black Bachelor in its like 23 or 22 seasons, I believe. um, Matt James. And we have some interesting thoughts on Matt, but that also speak to a bigger cultural relevance, cultural issues around race and ethnicity, and the show in general and how it prepares its contestants and its audiences to deal with race. And so I'm just like, for someone who doesn't really like watch it, I'm just curious, like, one, what do you think about Matt? And then two, this idea of him being like the first Black Bachelor. And I don't say like black in air quotes because he's not, just like the narrative around how big of a deal this is.
yeah, I see. So I think around him being the first Black Bachelor in the year 2021, this kind of feels like, and the way that it seems to all be going down, which also I know I'm in an echo chamber and I'm only reading commentary from people who are like me, but it feels like too little too late, and almost like, so y'all tried and you should have consulted some people. Like, there are just too many resources in 2021 to make these simple mistakes. And the commentary that's coming out even around the contestants, the time that they're getting on camera, a lot of the framing around Matt, I just think like in 2021 you guys couldn't find some, like, I don't think they have, I don't think that anybody at Bachelor has Black friends. I think they had like nobody they asked about this, and Chris Harrison's like, we'll put a Black person in and it'll be totally fine, and then everybody will be fine with it, and all we have to do is have Black people. Like, we don't need to address any of all of the like systemic issues that got us to this point.
And I think that it's interesting that you mentioned that, like, is there anybody on this team that either has Black friends or is a person of color themselves? And I read somewhere that this production team is actually the most diverse that they've had because of Matt, which
Oh.
which is interesting. And this is gonna be my first hot take, in that like I'm very much like the whites can have it. Like, you can like I don't think that we don't need diverse contestants, because I don't think it actually, like, I don't see black love or Asian, AAPI or Latinx love like needs to be just like di- what am I trying to say, like, um viewed or visualized as so messy, like like that. I'm like, I am very much okay with seeing, you know, these people be messy. I don't think production has ever been prepared to have any kind of multicultural contestant. If you want multicultural, I hate that like term, but like any kind of other
Mhm.
person, because it speaks to a bigger issue in that like most people who are white don't have to have conversations about race really, unless you're in an interracial relationship yourself, or in a very like diverse group of friends where you're having these conversations naturally. So like I just don't feel like to try and like plop somebody in and then be like, look, like we're diverse. I'm like, great, but like how are you creating an environment on set, from things like hair and makeup, and then allowing to like have serious conversations be facilitated when there's interracial dating happening anyway. There's a lot of things to unpack there, and if nobody in production is equipped to like even allow for that conversation those conversations happen, like we're like we're not going to get anywhere that's beneficial. So I'm like, I'm not particularly interested. I'll watch the show depending on who the contestants are, like who gives me the most drama. But like I wasn't one to be like when Rachel Lindsay was the first black bachelorette, I was excited because she seemed like she was beautiful, she was smart. I was like, "Oh wow, it was nice to see like a black woman desired by like so many different men." But like she quickly became disappointing for me in ways that are very different than Matt, which we'll get to. But like I quickly realized I was like, this show is not for we don't need to have this is not for us. Like I can watch it, like I watch a lot, like same way I watch like Masterpiece Theater with like white British people, I can enjoy The Bachelor as something that like is a part of their culture. Um, I don't know. I know, but like that might. I know that's not maybe a popular opinion of most, but that's where I'm at right now. And like, it's like diversity for like sake of diversity, which makes me feel icky. Like I don't because with Matt and then picking him, like I don't know if he was like the right like first Black Bachelor to pick. But in hindsight, I think he was the right one for the this franchise's audience, if that makes
Mm-hmm.
sense.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of where I'm at right now. I'm gonna get into the Matt drag, I'm sure, but like, but I just yeah.
I feel like, should we just get into the Matt drag? Do you
I
want
mean,
to
yeah,
just
let's
go
just go.
for it? Let's,
Yeah, just go
yeah.
for it. Yeah. Well, okay, so look, he seems like a nice enough man. He also has like the personality of a raisin. Like he's really boring to me. Like I just like I think that I just would rather watch like the snow melt. Like he just is not. He's real flat, and so I just not. He's like not engaging at all.
Oh.
But you do some research into who this man was. So like he's from like South Carolina or North Carolina or something like that. He's actually biracial, which if you watch the show, you'll know because he's quick to be like, I have a white mother and a black father. He says it a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And so, which not to take anything from him being biracial, but he wants folks to know that like his mama is white. And if you look at like his Instagram pre-show, like he grew up with a lot of white friends. He's a card carrying Republican, which nothing against Republicans, but like I think that speaks to like a very specific type of black man. And then if you look at all the women that he used to date, they were all white women and a very specific type of white woman
Mm-hmm.
too. And so I think it did a disservice of ABC and the Bachelor franchise to be like, we have the most diverse cast ever with the first black bachelor, and then you present a man, you're like, he's gonna give us who's gonna give us, like
Mm-hmm.
you can I just don't think it's also fair to the women of color that they put on this show because like they don't stand a chance. Like I'm sure he had to sign a contract to be like, okay, you have to make sure that at least one black girl makes it to the top four, but like we know you're not gonna choose her, but she's gotta get there. I'm like, it's like not fair for these women to come in and be like, oh, I see this man, he's handsome, I have a chance. It's like, no, girl, you don't, because you're melanin, you got too much of it. And so I don't know. I think I mean, this also speaks to an issue of like black people, we come in like all shapes and colors and sizes, and the diaspora is wide, and so our experiences, aren't monolithic. And him having a white mother also makes his experience much different than like, somebody who's West Indian with two black parents, or African with two black parents, or even African American with two black parents. And I can't speak to how many black people have been in his life growing up, but the looks of his social media, it doesn't seem like there's a lot. So I think it also does a disservice to label him. I mean, you see him, you look at him like that is a black man. I just don't know how fair it is to like label him as the first black this when I don't even think this man identifies as a black man. I think he identifies as a
Mm-hmm.
bit biracial man with a white mother. Like, so maybe he has some stuff to unpack, but I just think there's like again, they're setting us up for mess, which is what the show does. But this kind of mess feels very like icky and dangerous to me, in a way that's like not fun. Like,
Yeah.
and
Can you say more about the dangerous part of this?
a lot of the reasons why I think he was picked is because he's safe. He represents a type of black person that's acceptable to the masses. He quote unquote speaks well, or he's a Republican, or like, he dresses a certain way, and so he's digestible. And I think while that is a type of person, right? Like we all have different experiences, and I think it's dangerous to say that like he is also the peak of blackdom, like that everybody should want to strive to like be with, when I think he's mad corny. Like, because my fear is like people that watch that and see him and are like, see, like, why can't so and so be like, that, like him,
Hmm.
and I think in the first episode he talks about the pressure, the weight of being the first black bachelor. And again, I'm like, yeah, I get it, but I don't even know if you understand like that. And I don't even think you understand like in them picking you, how they're setting you up for failure. Cause I don't know. Like he had not been in the franchise before. Like he had no idea like what goes into like this whole Bachelor Nation world. So in the ways I feel like he's a little bit naive.
Hmm.
Um and I think production kind of like took advantage of that. Um and so I don't know. I feel like I would have much rather have seen like there were a couple men on Claire and Taisha's season who I'm like could have been great options,
Hmm.
if they really wanted to have this first. We probably would have gotten more interesting conversations and like a real chance at seeing like black love or whatever that means. But like we are not getting it with Matt James. I'm sorry. Like his receipts are gonna have told us otherwise. Like all you gotta do is like do a couple months like deep dive in his Instagram. Like this man is not giving us. We're not getting love and basketball from Matt James. Okay, it's not gonna be like like some great love story.
Yeah.
And I also want to make it clear, like I think that I'm someone that has dated interracially. I'm not against it. I think love is love is a beautiful thing, but I think setting this up as like a potential great love story, I'm like, and I don't think that this man was the right choice for a lot of reasons, but like I think production really felt like they were doing something with him, um, and it kind of unleashed their own like bias and like internal racism in picking him because
Hmm.
they deemed him acceptable for whatever reason, and he's boring. He's not even exciting. So like, come on.
There's really not anything that's uncomfortable about him or his experience for white people to have to like, get into it or pull apart, which is why I
Mhm,
think why I see that they would choose someone like him, because no, just any of these
mhm.
conversations that generally make like nice white ladies feel uncomfortable and want to just like turn it off because they're starting to feel emotions. Like I it seems is, I guess, the benefit of having the personality of a raisin is there's not much complexity to you.
Yeah, I totally get that, and that's also maybe goes back to my original point in hot take, in that like they're clearly are making a show for a white audience.
Yeah. Oh,
So
yes.
you know what I'm
Yes.
saying. So I'm like, why even then need to like go through the like the whole celebration and antics to be like have these firsts, if you're still going to gear them to a white audience. Authentic. I think he's authentic in his experience, and his experience as a black person is not unique. It is part of the diaspora, right? Like I said, we look and represent all sorts of communities. But I think there is a deeper conversation to be had about like, yeah, like what is acceptable like for your audience, and like why aren't we showing a different kind of experience, like
Mhm.
example, I'll give my example, me being a child of immigrants, I'm a West Indian, like was raised in a West Indian household. And my upbringing looks very different than, you know, the upbringing of, the students that we worked with, where we're from, or,
Mhm.
even our friends from like the South, Louisiana, like it looks different from them. And we have this rich culture that's very diverse and different. We don't always, even within the Black community, we don't allow ourselves to be different. Like there is a, I think like there is, I don't know how to say this in a way that's like it's gonna piss people off, but I think that in some ways there's, black culture is so, um it gets like blanketed over so many people, and there's some things that I find myself identifying with. I was like that, like this is actually not part of my like upbringing. Like I learned about this as I've gotten older. um I've been in different spaces with, Black people, African American folks from all over the place. But I find myself subscribing to this. I'm like, this is actually not, I actually like in growing up was not my experience, like silly things, nothing like super, super serious. But I fully identify as a Black woman, and I understand that when I go out into society, it doesn't matter, where my parents are from, the fact that I'm a first gen kid, they see a Black woman and they apply a lot of things to my experience that I may or may not have had. And it's been my personal choice to like engage with that, and not necessarily correct people. But I do have conversations with people that I trust around like the diaspora and like why we need to have more conversations about like how multi-layered and faceted Black culture is. So I say all that, and I also feel bad like shitting on Matt because he's who he is, but it's not necessarily about him, but like the entity that says that he's acceptable when like others are not, if that makes sense.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
like that's really, really frustrating. I like want people to understand, especially like nice white ladies that watch The Bachelor, like there's a lot of ways to be Black. Um, and none of them are better or worse than others. But when you see a Matt James, he just gives me real like like sympathize. Like if you behave and act a certain way, then you will be fine. Like I also think they pick people that are not gonna pick other Black people. Like even with Rachel Lindsay, Taisha, who took over for Claire, she's Mexican and African American, I believe. She's also biracial. I mean, she picked a white dude. I don't think a person of color made it to her top three. And then Rachel Lindsay is the same thing. Like her top three were all, well, two white men and like a Latino man. So again, it's like I don't know if they're picking people that are gonna necessarily want like people that look like them. And I don't know if that's not wrong, but I like also wonder like why? Like what is that saying about the Bachelor franchise?
Is there anyone that you would have been happy with as a pick for the first Black Bachelor?
Mm. Yeah, so there was a guy on actually Claire um and Taisha's season. I think his name was Riley. He was like I think he made like top 5 or 4. He's like a lawyer. Had a really interesting story. And then there's also a guy that made it I think to top 4. I forget their names because I'm like
Yeah.
but I think he was like top 4, and he had a really interesting story too. Like his brother had been in prison. I can't remember
Oh,
yeah, you know who I'm
I
talking
remember this.
about.
Yep.
Yeah, like I think his younger brother was in prison, so like he had helped raise his niece, and just like had a really interesting story. Was a cool guy, like really attractive, personable. Like every time he was on camera, I was like, hello. And then like, because I was like, he was very nice to look at, but also just
Hmm.
like really had an interesting background, and the
Hmm.
way in which and so actually with Taisha, they had a brief conversation about like Black Lives Matter and like um police brutality, because he talks about his brother being in prison and like how his relationship with like law enforcement changed because of that. And it was
Hmm.
really interesting. And I was like, let this play out. Like, let them keep talking. Um, and then also on that season, there was a guy named Riley who was really cool, that I felt like he was super charismatic and charming. I think he could have been a really good like bachelor as well. I think they do like really take into consideration the audience, like audience favorites in their picks sometimes. For somebody recent that people would know, it have been those two from the last season. I think there was a couple from, again, I don't watch them all either. I will say that. But there there was one guy too from Rachel's season who had a daughter who I thought was really cool. Um, but yeah, I mean, here's another thing too. There's not this like emphasis on picking, like there's not been any white bachelor or bachelorettes who've dated interracially, like have not dated, picked somebody who wasn't white. And so I
Mhm.
don't also know, like again, this is why I feel like the show is just, we should keep it for white folks, because there's a weird fascination with when the contestant is othered on who they pick in a way that's not, that there's no like fatuation with it when
Mm.
it's like, you know,
Yep.
Hannah, or you know,
Mhm.
or like whomever these, like, whoever these other people have been. So
Mhm.
that's, yeah.
I don't think I would have been happy with anyone that they picked to be the first Black Bachelor, but it's
Mhm.
because I think it's unacceptable that we're on the first Black Bachelor in the year 2021 and after
Right,
23 seasons. So like we
right,
should be mad about how maybe how they're representing, Black men in general on the
right,
show, but
mhm,
instead we're talking about the first time they ever gave a Black dude the mic on the
right,
show. And so it's
right,
like,
right,
and it's too, they could have slid this in like 5 years ago before people were getting so like awake and aware to all of this, and
right,
they could have avoided like so much crap that they're taking and gonna have to keep taking if they would have just like done this a while ago. And I guess there's probably not a reason for them to, because it's not their target audience. And yeah,
right.
I don't
And
know.
I agree. And it's like, for all intents and purposes, the the recipe hasn't failed them. They still
Mhm.
get huge numbers. So far, we've had two women of color, two black women, and now a first man. And like, that doesn't speak to the other quote unquote marginalized groups, right? Like,
Mhm.
we really want
Yeah.
to have a conversation about diversity. We could talk about the lack of Asian representation on the Bachelor franchise. When I'm talking about, like, I don't even think, and there have been like beautiful contestants on both ends, like on that show, to the point where I've seen people where I've been like, no, 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 like I don't care about this person. Like, zoom in on this man, like where did this person go? Like
Yeah.
they'll be in like a shot, amongst the 30 and then like go home. And
Mm.
so I just, that's why I feel like the show is ill equipped to deal with how to deal with people from all these different backgrounds and how to like position them in a way in which they can be picked, I guess, because you know if you understand how the production on the show works, like production is absolutely playing the game.
Mhm. Mhm.
There is a, like, these people need to make it a certain like week in, you can have your picks. Like these people are creating good TV, so you need to push them along. I think Juan Paul, he was, I don't know where he was from, and then I think they had a bachelorette who may have been Latinx, I think. And then obviously Rachel's now husband, I think, he's Cuban. But other than them, like we haven't had, you know, it's it's been very black and white, and like, so I think the franchise in general just is struggles in
Mhm.
a way, in like positioning people of color on the show in a way that can allow them to fall in love. Actually, I would love a season of just like only people of color. Like if we're gonna do it, like that should do it like that, instead of like having these people appease to the white gaze.
Mm. Mm.
Give us a
Mhm.
full season of like only spiciness, and
Mm.
otherwise, like, you can leave it for the unmelanated. And that's why, and like, I know I'm not a popular opinion and people are going to probably be really offended by that. But I just feel like if you're going to do a piss poor job at this, like, why even bother? Like,
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
could, it's like if the people who are making the decisions are still very much subscribed to a certain standard of, you know, beauty, love, the show's foundation, that's what's going to end up shaking out. I really do actually wonder, like, when they talk about like the production team being more diverse, like what level of the production
Mhm.
team? Or like, do you have like five black PAs and then like everybody else?
Right.
You know what I mean? Or is it
Right.
like, as a showrunner now at this point, a person of color? You're like, who? Where is it? Is
Mhm.
now the question I want to ask because I'm like, something's not shaking out right here. Um,
Right. Yeah, I
yeah.
mean, because I mean, it's like what we're seeing at companies right now who are rushing to like hit the diversity checkbox so that they then in the rush to hit check that diversity box, nobody's planning for the equity and inclusion piece, which is just as important. Like
Mhm.
you can't maintain diversity if you're not establishing equity and inclusion at the same time. So
Exactly. Yeah, 100%. And I think for a lot of people too, um, I think it diversity is like absolutely what you see. Like, yeah, it's a check the box thing. It's what you see. Like,
mhm,
do we have an Asian? Do we have a black? Do we have a Latinx? Do you have an LGBTQIA? Do you have an indigenous person? Great, check. We are
mhm,
diverse. But it's like, wait a minute. Like, how are these people feeling empowered to like use their voices in their platforms and their positions within your company? Are they given leadership opportunities? Are you willing to step back to push them forward? You know what I'm saying? Like, these kinds of conversations, it's not enough to like place somebody at your table and be like, look, and then they can't be successful at their table, at that table. You know what I'm saying? Like,
mhm,
diversity for the sake of diversity is extremely dangerous, which we know, like
mhm,
you have to, and I think, I mean, and also I think, especially since Civil Rights Summer, I think people really just want to check the box. Like, I think people want to say, like, I've read that thing, I've posted that thing, like, and I really feel like we need to pivot into like educating yourselves, like, which you still need to do, but like now people need to start like engaging with culture.
mhm,
It's not about like how well read you can be about anti-racism or the history of slavery or even or like even the diaspora, but like as a black woman, I would like you one to know what the diaspora is, you know, and understand that like as a West Indian person, my experience could be different than, somebody who is from Southeast DC or, like raised in Louisiana, a direct descendant of American chattel slavery and like what those different microcosms of culture look like.
mhm,
I don't need you to be an expert in everything and in everybody's culture because that's impossible. But just like actually try to engage with some of it. It's not enough to read a book, or like share a post. That's not, and I feel like since this summer, I feel like that's what people think it's about. And it's like, no, we need you to see our humanity.
mhm.
I need
Yeah.
you to, like when you, and I think that really frustrates me as a person who I think feels so much about everything because to me it's so cut and dry. I'm like, that is another human being. And just because they are human and deserve my grace and kindness and understanding. And a lot of people it's like I'm legit I'm curious about other people. And a lot of people don't seem to be like that. So since the summer, you saw a wave of like, let's all be an anti-racist and like, get this racism shit out of here. We're gonna be a better America. Like, and I was cautiously optimistic. I would say now I am very much like, we're in the place where I thought we would be. Like, you know, people are over it. But, it's a continuous cycle of learning. But more so, I want people to just engage with the culture. Like this is not it's an ongoing thing and it's an ongoing learning opportunity, yes, but like spice up your life, like, like it's fun, like to learn and try new things and learn about people from different places. Like, let yourself be uncomfortable. And I feel like the Bachelor franchise isn't willing to let themselves be uncomfortable and are not willing to risk like losing some ratings, to really like dive deep into something that could be, you know, quote unquote
Powerful.
revolutionary. Yeah, really powerful. But
Yeah.
again, I don't think the infrastructure of that show is the vehicle for this. Like, it is dedicated to mess. In which case, let the show be messy, and like you could make the show extremely diverse and like not make it an issue, right? They could just put people on and never be like, it's the first this, or and just like let people be like wilding out here and be like, like, see, like Matt can be just as messy as, Pilot Pete, and that be fine. That be revolutionary in itself. But it's the
Mhm.
fact that they have to put all this pressure on him now representing the Black community.
Are there specific like ways that you want to see that happening, or like ways that you would envision like a way how that looks kind of?
Yeah, for people to approach these things, engaging in anything different from them, like with humility and in a space of like, I don't always know, but I'm curious. It's something that you do. It's not like you're actively engaging with all sorts of things and people, and in a way that's like beautiful and like authentic. And so place yourself, with people who are different than you. You could break bread with people. Church is one way. Um, Food, film, there's all sorts of venues that you can step into just to like to learn and grow, and obviously not approach it as like an anthropological experiment, but just like,
Mhm.
I want, I want just to engage in something that I recognize I haven't before, and I mean, that looks different on every person, but there are ways in which you can be authentic about your approach. And I think especially for white people, you also have to be prepared to be rejected from those spaces, right? And like you have to understand that sometimes we just need like our own spaces. It's not about you personally, but because systems have just allowed us from being in spaces comfortably. And so sometimes you're just gonna have to be like okay with knowing that sometimes a space isn't for you,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
like don't take it personally. I think sometimes with white people, they're so afraid of being A, rejected, or B, saying the wrong things that they just don't engage at all.
Mhm.
But you're gonna know, like, you're gonna mess up. I say the wrong things all the time too, and when I'm learning about communities that are not innate to me, and but what I have to do is humbly apologize, recognize mistake, and then like figure out how I can do better so I don't make that mistake again. And I feel like especially since Civil Rights Summer, people make one mistake and check out, and
Yeah.
that's their privilege, and they like don't want to be told that that's their privilege. I think what's really hard for white people especially is, I think when you're othered, whether it be race, gender, religion, um, sexuality, you are versed in, you become an expert in whatever that thing is. You know how to talk about it. You grow up talking about it. I have the vocabulary to talk about what my race and identity means to other people. And I've been instructed on how to do so since I was little. And I think for a lot of white people, the first time they have these difficult conversations specifically to race and ethnicity is when shit like the summer pops off, and they're forced to hold up the mirror and see how the system has benefited them. And so they don't have the vocabulary, they don't have the experience, and it's much easier to be like, I'm gonna stay over my little lane. I'm not gonna like, I don't want to piss anybody off, but like we're not gonna get anywhere if we don't have, these kinds of conversations that are difficult, and with the understanding that you're gonna mess up,
Yeah.
but that's okay, because then you learn, you fix it, you don't think Simone Biles is out here like doing 8 million backflips without falling a few times. She had to like, she
Right.
didn't get to the
Right.
Olympics winning 80 million gold medals, but not ever trying. She had to like fall a few times. She was course corrected and then was able to be a boss. And like that's the same for like anytime you're entering a community or a situation that's not innate to you. You gotta try,
Yeah.
that's all I'm asking people to do is like at least try. And then when you fail, don't get super defensive,
Mhm.
when someone's trying to like correct you on like, maybe that wasn't the thing to say or thing to do, like
Right.
learn from that.
Yeah. I mean, I think that we are really fortunate that we had our work experience that we did, because
Yeah.
so many people messed up, and they like, we had to always have these difficult conversations that were so frustrating and uncomfortable in the moment. And I remember even like when we were there always being like, oh, we just blow everything up, everything is so dramatic here all the time, and if we would just
Yeah.
like move on and from things. But now I realize that it was important to like be in that and talk through it and like talk through mistakes and make,
Hmm.
and then I feel like my tolerance for discomfort is like really high after that experience.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
but you had to build that up. People got to get comfortable with discomfort. And
Right. Yeah. And I mean, you nailed it. And I say this all the time, and it's again hindsight's 2020, because when we're in that situation,
yeah,
like you said, we're like, I don't want to talk about this anymore. But like, I look at my life like pre that time and post it, and like obviously I've been black my whole life, but I was somebody like Matt who grew up in very white spaces. Well, when I was young, I had most of my friends were actually Asian, growing up in the Pacific Northwest. But when I moved to Virginia, it was mostly white spaces, and honestly, the first time I dealt with like racism, overt and covert, and like microaggressions in a very interesting way, even with people who were friends of mine, that I can look back now and be like, fuck, how, like, that's crazy, some of the situations I was in, right? And like all these people are really good, like well-meaning people, um but like who were, and some are very good friends of mine and were great friends to me in times that were really difficult. But
mhm,
like looking back on it now, being like, this shit was wild, and feeling uncomfortable in situations with things that people said and did, and not fully understanding like why I was uncomfortable, and not having the vocabulary to like express what I was feeling or what was happening. But it wasn't until like doing our program and having endless seminars and professional development and learning Fridays, talking about things, like bias and prejudice and how that comes out in different ways. I was like given the vocabulary to have those difficult conversations. It's a muscle that you have to
yeah,
keep working. It's you have to keep talking and practicing, this anti-racist, mentality. And a lot of people just haven't had that, and
yeah,
so I feel like talks like this that we're doing, I hope that wherever you decide to like post this, like people think, or like it sparks something in their brain and they want to have a conversation around it. Because I truly feel like the only way we're ever going to get to a place where we could even maybe even dismantle racism and the effects of it is by conversations, and getting to know people that are different from us. Otherwise,
mhm,
we're going to be doomed to like have these same cycles consistently. And I wish more organizations would, I wish they would create more spaces where people could have uncomfortable conversations with the people that are working with teams in, because it's important. And,
yeah,
I think it only makes the work better. You can't force people to work in diverse teams and then be like, not do anything to support them or acknowledge the ways in which the people on those teams are experiencing what's going on around them.
yeah,
I think if anything I want people to get out of this conversation is that Black people are not a monolith. We have a range of experiences. And I know I just shot on Matt, but like he has his own experience as a Black man, and it's not good, bad, it's not ideal, or subpar. It's his experience, but it's one of many. And like I think as someone now who works in media and seeing the way in which our stories are told, the stereotypes that are displayed, it's frustrating because there's a very specific narrative that's always pushed. And while I would like to see other narratives, I also want people to understand like that narrative is some people's experience, and that's neither good or bad. um but I would like for people to engage with that experience in a different way than it has been, which is always so negative. It goes beyond like I want to be like fucking open a book, but like that's not, it needs to go beyond that, like take some time to like understand the things that you're complaining about or you are, you know, ranting about like without having any kind of acknowledge or experience. You know what I mean? Like,
Mhm.